The real story. Horror. Only. At Mr. Scare.
I always thought of working late as peaceful. When the office was empty, the hum of computers and the distant buzz of fluorescent lights created an oddly comforting atmosphere. No meetings, no interruptions, just me and the quiet. That night was no different, or so I thought. It was just past 9 p.m., and everyone else had left hours ago. My project was due in the morning, so I stayed behind to finish it. I didn't mind. It wasn't the first time I'd been the last one in the building, and I doubted it would be the last. The office was dark except for the glow of my monitor. My desk was tucked in a corner near the break room, which was separated from the rest of the open-plan space by a row of cubicles. It was quiet enough that I could hear the faint hum of the HVAC system and the occasional creak of the building settling. At first, everything was fine. I typed away, pausing only to sip my coffee. But then I heard it, a faint click, like a door closing. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Hello?" I called out, my voice breaking the silence. No response. I shook my head, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe the air pressure had caused one of the doors to shift, or maybe I'd just imagined it. I went back to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The office felt colder, and the air seemed heavier, like I was being watched. I told myself it was just paranoia. Being alone in a big building at night can do that to you. Then I heard footsteps. They were faint, but unmistakable, slow, deliberate, and coming from the direction of the break room. My heart pounded as I turned in my chair, staring at the darkened hallway. "Is someone there?" I called out. Silence. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 9:42 p.m. Too late for a cleaner. Too early for the security guard's midnight rounds. I debated calling someone, but what would I even say? That I thought I heard footsteps? I'd sound ridiculous. Summoning my courage, I stood up and walked toward the break room. The lights flickered as I stepped inside, the fluorescent bulbs buzzing faintly. It was empty. Just the usual. The coffee machine, the fridge, the round table where we ate lunch. Then I saw it. On the table was a mug. Not just any mug. My mug. The one I'd been using at my desk. It was sitting there, as if someone had placed it neatly in the center of the table. My stomach churned. I hadn't brought it here. I was certain of that. I backed out of the break room, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My hands were shaking as I returned to my desk. But when I got there, I stopped cold. The document I'd been working on was gone. My computer screen was black, as if it had been turned off. The keyboard and mouse were completely unresponsive, and then my phone buzzed. The notification was from an unknown number. It was a text message, and all it said was, "Why are you still here?" I felt a wave of cold fear wash over me. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. What if it was just a prank? A stupid joke from a coworker who had somehow stayed behind without me noticing. I typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came immediately. "Leave now." I stood there, my mind racing. My instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the building and never look back. But something held me in place. Curiosity? Pride? I don't know. All I knew was that I couldn't leave without finding out what was happening. I grabbed my bag and decided to check the rest of the office. The lights flickered more as I moved through the rows of cubicles, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Everything looked normal. Desks with their monitors off, chairs pushed neatly under them. Then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I spun around, shining the flashlight from my phone. There was nothing there. But as I lowered the light, I noticed something on one of the desks, a piece of paper folded neatly in half. My name was written on the outside in handwriting I didn't recognize. With trembling hands, I picked it up and unfolded it. The message inside was scrawled hastily. The ink smudged. "They're watching you." I dropped the paper and ran. I made it to the elevator, slamming the button for the ground floor over and over. The doors finally slid shut, and I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. But then the elevator stopped, not at the ground floor, at the basement. The doors opened with a ding, revealing nothing but darkness. The air was cold, and the faint smell of mildew wafted in. I jabbed the button to close the doors, but they wouldn't respond. And then I heard it again. Footsteps. This time, they were louder, heavier, and getting closer. A shadow appeared at the edge of the darkness, just beyond the reach of the elevator's light. It was tall and thin, its movements jerky and unnatural. As it stepped closer, I could see its face, or rather, the lack of one. Its head was featureless, smooth and pale like wax, except for two deep, hollow sockets where eyes should have been. It stopped at the threshold, tilting its head as if studying me. Then it reached out. I don't remember much after that. The next thing I knew, I was outside, sitting on the curb with my bag beside me. The building was dark, and my car was the only one in the lot. My phone was in my hand, displaying a final text message from the unknown number. "You're lucky you left." I quit my job the next day. I don't know what I saw that night or who or what sent the messages. But sometimes, when I'm alone at home late at night, I swear I hear footsteps outside my door, and I don't dare open it. It was a little past 10 p.m. when I realized I'd forgotten the report on my desk. It was due first thing in the morning, and my boss, Mr. Adler, wasn't exactly known for his patience. Sighing, I grabbed my keys and decided to make the drive back to the office. The thought of facing him empty-handed was far worse than a late-night trip. The building was eerily quiet when I arrived, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as I swiped my badge and stepped into the elevator. I worked on the 11th floor, right next to Mr. Adler's office. He was a private man, always keeping his door shut, his blinds drawn, and his workspace off-limits to everyone. It wasn't unusual for senior managers to have their own sanctuaries, but there was something about Adler that had always made me uneasy. When I reached my desk, I grabbed the report and started to leave. That's when I noticed it. Mr. Adler's door was slightly ajar. It was strange. Adler was meticulous about locking up. I debated whether I should check it out. Maybe I could just close the door and forget I'd seen anything. But curiosity got the better of me. If it was nothing, I could pretend I hadn't even been there. The air grew colder as I approached. Pushing the door open, I stepped into his office for the first time. It was exactly what I expected. Neat, minimalist, with a large desk, a leather chair, and shelves filled with books that looked like they had never been opened. The faint scent of polished wood lingered in the air, but something didn't feel right. My eyes landed on the far wall, where a massive bookshelf dominated the space. One of the shelves was slightly ajar, like it had been pulled forward. I hesitated, a knot forming in my stomach. It looked like a door. Against my better judgment, I walked over and gave the shelf a gentle push. It swung open silently, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward. A chilly draft rose from the depths, carrying a faint, acrid scent that turned my stomach and sent a shiver down my spine. Why would he have this? I whispered to myself. I should have left. I should have turned around, closed the door, and gone home. But instead I started descending the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the narrow space. The walls were made of rough concrete, and the further I went, the colder it became. At the bottom of the staircase was a heavy steel door. It wasn't locked, and when I pushed it open, I stepped into a large, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves, but instead of books, they were filled with jars. Dozens of them. Each jar contained something different: bones, teeth, and unidentifiable organic shapes floating in a yellowish liquid. A low hum filled the room, coming from fluorescent lights flickering overhead. In the center of the room was a table, and on it lay an open file. My name was on the cover. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The file contained detailed notes about me, where I lived, my routines, even personal emails I'd sent. Flipping through the pages, I found photographs of me, taken from angles that suggested I'd been followed. I wasn't the only one. There were other files, stacked neatly on the table, each with a different employee's name. Some had large red X's marked across the front. My hands shook as I opened one. Inside were gruesome photos of a man I recognized, a former coworker who had mysteriously quit months ago. The photo showed him lying in a dark room, restrained, his face contorted in terror. The final picture was of him in a glass jar, dismembered and preserved, like the ones on the shelves. The sound of a door slamming above jolted me out of my stupor. Someone was in the office. I panicked, stuffing my file into my bag and backing toward the staircase. Footsteps echoed above, growing louder, heavier. I extinguished the light and pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs.
"Who's there?"
Mr. Adler's voice boomed, cold and sharp. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't come down, but the sound of his shoes descending the stairs shattered that hope. Thinking quickly, I ducked behind one of the shelves. Adler entered the room, his shadow stretching across the walls. He was carrying something, a long curved blade that gleamed faintly in the flickering light. He moved to the table, picking up one of the files and flipping through it.
"You shouldn't have come here,"
he muttered to himself, his voice low and dangerous. I clamped a hand over my mouth, trying to stay silent. But then, a jar on the shelf beside me shifted, the glass scraping against metal. Adler's head snapped toward the noise.
"Come out,"
he said, his voice calm, but dripping with menace.
"I know you're here."
I bolted. I ran up the stairs, adrenaline propelling me forward. Behind me, I could hear Adler's heavy footsteps and the scrape of the blade against the wall.
"You don't understand,"
he shouted.
"You can't leave now."
I burst into the office and grabbed the first thing I could find, a glass paperweight, hurling it at him as he emerged from the staircase. It hit him square in the chest, and he stumbled, giving me just enough time to make it to the elevator. The doors closed just as he reached them, his expression twisted in rage. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away from the office. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? I went back the next morning, but the office was locked, and the police were already there. They said Mr. Adler had left town suddenly, his house empty, his office cleared out. The other employees acted like nothing was wrong, like Adler's disappearance was just another strange quirk. But I knew better. It's been weeks, and I still can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see the jars, the files, the photos, and worse, I see his face. Sometimes I think I hear footsteps outside my door late at night, slow and deliberate. And sometimes I swear I smell that metallic tang, faint and chilling, just like the air in that room. Working the late-night cleaning shift wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The building was always eerily quiet after hours, with the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the distant whir of the air conditioning. I had my routine down to a science. Empty trash bins, vacuum the carpets, wipe down desks, repeat. The office was a sprawling maze of cubicles, and once in a while, I'd pass by the CEO's corner office, the one place I rarely touched. The rumors about this company didn't bother me much at first. Everyone in the office gossiped about a former employee, a young woman named Rachel, who had supposedly died under mysterious circumstances. The story was always the same. Rachel had been pushed to the brink by the CEO, her complaints ignored, until one night, she took her own life right here in the building. Some claimed to have seen her ghost, while others swore they'd heard her voice echoing in the empty halls. I wasn't one to believe in ghost stories, but I couldn't deny the unease I felt every time I passed by the CEO's door. One night, my supervisor handed me a new task.
The boss wants his office cleaned.
She said, shoving the key into my hand.
He's out of town, so now's a good time to do it.
I nodded, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in my chest. The CEO's office had always felt off limits, like a forbidden sanctuary. I chalked it up to the rumors. As I unlocked the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, I was struck by how pristine everything looked. The room smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. The desk meticulously organized, not a speck of dust in sight. Still, I got to work, wiping down the desk and vacuuming the carpet. That's when I noticed the cabinet. It was a tall, black filing cabinet, tucked into the corner, barely noticeable at first glance. Something about it drew my attention. Maybe it was the way it seemed slightly out of place in the otherwise sleek, modern office. The top drawer was slightly ajar, as if someone had opened it in a hurry and forgotten to close it properly. Curiosity got the better of me. I set down my cleaning supplies and pulled the drawer open. Inside was a mess of folders, papers, stuffed haphazardly into manila envelopes. One caught my eye immediately. CCTV Archives, April 2018. My heart skipped a beat. April 2018. That was the month Rachel had died. The official story was that the CCTV footage from that night had been mysteriously lost, fueling the rumors about foul play. With trembling hands, I pulled out the envelope and opened it. Inside was a USB drive. I stared at the drive, my mind racing. Should I watch it? What if I wasn't supposed to find it? But the weight of the rumors and the strange feeling that had settled over me left me no choice. There was a computer on the CEO's desk. I hesitated, glancing around the empty office as if someone might appear to stop me. Then, slowly, I plugged in the USB drive and opened the files. The footage was grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. It showed Rachel in the break room late at night, pacing back and forth. She looked upset, her hands running through her hair as she muttered to herself. Then the door opened, and the CEO stepped in. I leaned closer, my breath caught in my throat. The conversation had no audio, but their body language said everything. Rachel pointed at him, her gestures frantic, as if she were pleading. He stood there, unmoving, his face cold and impassive. Then it happened. He lunged at her, grabbing her by the arm. She struggled, trying to pull away, but he was too strong. The struggle moved off camera, and seconds later, Rachel was gone. The footage ended abruptly. My hands shook as I ejected the USB drive. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. This wasn't a ghost story. It was a cover-up. And then I heard it. A faint whisper, so soft, I almost thought I imagined it.
Help me.
I froze, every muscle in my body tense. The room felt colder, the air heavier.
Help me.
It was louder this time, unmistakable. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the empty office. That's when I saw it. A faint figure, standing in the doorway. Rachel. She looked exactly like the photos I'd seen of her. Long brown hair, wide, pleading eyes. But she was pale, almost translucent, her form flickering like a bad signal on a TV.
Help me.
She whispered again, her voice barely audible. I stumbled back, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. I saw the footage, I stammered. I know what happened. Her expression didn't change, but she raised a hand, pointing toward the filing cabinet. I opened the second drawer, my movements mechanical, like I was being guided. Inside were more files, each labeled with dates spanning years. It wasn't just Rachel. There were others, names, photos, and more footage. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, a cacophony of voices pleading for justice. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the evidence. Eventually, I grabbed as much as I could carry and fled the office. The next day, I turned everything over to the police. The fallout was immediate. The CEO was arrested. The company thrown into chaos as more victims came forward. Their stories, hauntingly similar to Rachel's. But even as justice was served, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Late at night, when I was alone, I still heard her voice. Soft, faint, but always there.
Thank you.
She would whisper. And sometimes, just before I drifted off to sleep, I'd catch a glimpse of her in the corner of my room, watching. The work trip started off better than any of us could have expected. My team and I had been assigned to inspect a remote construction site deep in the mountains. A daunting task on paper, but as soon as we arrived, it felt more like a retreat than actual work. The site was surrounded by towering pines, their needles whispering in the wind, and the air was crisp, untouched by the grime of city life. Our camp was set up in a clearing near the edge of the forest, and though the accommodations were nothing more than tents and sleeping bags, the absence of the usual pressures, emails, supervisors, and deadlines felt liberating. It didn't hurt that our manager had left us to handle things on our own, trusting that we'd get the job done. That lack of oversight was a rare treat, and we weren't about to waste it. The first few days passed smoothly. Mornings were spent assessing the site, taking notes on its layout, and marking potential hazards for the construction crew that would eventually follow. The work was straightforward, and the team, normally burdened by the stress of office politics, seemed lighter, friendlier. We laughed more, shared stories during breaks, and even found time to explore the nearby trails. In the evenings, we'd sit around a small campfire, eating canned meals and joking about how this trip was turning into more of a vacation than a job. Without a boss breathing down our necks, it felt like we were kids at summer camp again. There was no cell signal, which might have been inconvenient under normal circumstances. But here, it was freeing. No texts, no calls, no reminders of the lives we'd temporarily left behind. The site itself seemed almost magical in its isolation. During the day, the sun filtered through the trees, casting golden patches of light on the ground. The distant sound of a rushing river mixed with the rustling of leaves, creating a soundtrack that could have lulled anyone into a false sense of security. At night, the stars blanketed the sky in a way you could never see in the city. It was so quiet that we could hear our own breaths, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. By the third day, we'd finished most of our inspection and found ourselves with a free evening. That's when the suggestion came up. Why not make the most of our last night? Someone pulled out a stash of bottles they'd packed just in case. And it didn't take much convincing for the rest of the group to agree. After all, it wasn't every day that we had the chance to drink under the stars, free from responsibilities and the grind of daily life. A bonfire was built, bigger than usual, its flames crackling and casting dancing shadows against the trees. The first few drinks were slow and steady, but as the night wore on, inhibitions faded. Stories of past projects gave way to ghost tales and urban legends, the kind of spooky nonsense that only seemed fitting in a place as isolated as this. I wasn't much of a drinker, but it was hard not to get swept up in the energy. One of my co-workers, Logan, was an expert storyteller, spinning eerie tales about disappearances at construction sites and spirits haunting unfinished buildings. The more we drank, the more ridiculous the stories became, each one louder and more exaggerated than the last. By the time the bottles were nearly empty, we were all laughing too hard to care that the cold mountain air had crept in around us. The forest, which had seemed so tranquil during the day, now loomed like a dark, endless void. Yet even that added to the thrill of the night. For the first time in a long while, we felt untouchable. It was Logan who finally broke the spell.
I need to take a leak,
He announced, staggering to his feet. That seemed to trigger a chain reaction as a few others followed suit, disappearing into the trees one by one. I held off as long as I could, but soon enough, nature called. Grabbing a flashlight, I stumbled into the woods, telling myself I'd be quick. Little did I know that walk into the shadows would mark the last time I'd feel safe. Sometime past midnight, my bladder demanded attention. I stumbled to my feet, muttering something about answering nature's call, and wandered off into the darkness with a flashlight in hand. The forest was alive with the sounds of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. Despite the alcohol buzzing in my veins, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned, the beam of my flashlight revealed nothing but trees and shadows. I found a spot far enough from camp, did my business, and sighed in relief. But as I turned to head back, something felt off. The forest seemed quieter, like it was holding its breath. I could no longer hear the distant laughter and chatter of my coworkers. The bonfire's glow, which had been visible through the trees, was gone. "Guys?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. No response. I began walking back the way I thought I'd come, but the trees looked unfamiliar, and the ground felt different underfoot. Panic set in as I realized I was lost. I shouted louder this time. "Logan? John? Where are you?" Still nothing. As I wandered aimlessly, the air grew colder, and an unnatural fog began to settle around me. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light that only added to my disorientation. Then I heard it, a faint whisper. At first I thought it was my coworkers playing a prank, but the voices didn't sound like them. They were layered, overlapping, and coming from all directions.
"Come closer,"
one whispered.
Stay with us.
Another pleaded. I spun around trying to locate the source, but the fog was so thick now that I could barely see my own feet. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. My heart pounded as I broke into a run, hoping to find the camp. But no matter which direction I went, the forest seemed to stretch endlessly, trapping me in its labyrinth. That's when I saw it, a faint light in the distance. Relief washed over me as I stumbled toward it, hoping it was the bonfire. But as I got closer, I realized the light wasn't coming from a fire. It was a lantern, held by an old woman dressed in tattered clothes. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken and void of emotion. She stood silently, watching me. Something about her presence sent a chill down my spine.
"Are you lost?"
She asked, her voice rasping like dry leaves. I'm looking for my friends," I stammered, trying to steady my breathing. She tilted her head slightly, as if contemplating my words.
"Your friends are gone. But don't worry, you can stay with us."
Before I could respond, the lantern's light dimmed, and she vanished into the fog. Desperate and terrified, I kept moving. Hours seemed to pass before I finally stumbled into what looked like the camp clearing. But something was wrong. The tents were there, but they were torn and weathered, as if they'd been abandoned for years. The bonfire was a pile of cold ash, and my coworkers' belongings were scattered across the ground, covered in moss and dirt. I picked up a flask that I recognized as Logan's. It was rusted, the leather strap brittle and crumbling. My stomach churned as I noticed something else, a photograph pinned to one of the tents. It was an old black and white picture of a group of men standing in front of a construction site. Their faces were stern, but what caught my attention was that one of them looked exactly like me. Suddenly the whispers returned, louder and more urgent. Shadows moved at the edge of the clearing, circling me like predators. My flashlight died completely, plunging me into darkness. Just as I thought the shadows would engulf me, a hand grabbed my arm. I screamed, but a familiar voice hissed,
"It's me, John. Quiet."
John, one of my coworkers, looked just as terrified as I felt. His clothes were dirty, his face scratched, but he was alive. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded.
"There's something in the forest,"
he whispered.
"It's been following us since we got here. I tried to warn the others, but they didn't listen. They're gone now.
Gone? What do you mean, gone? He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled me toward the edge of the clearing.
We have to leave now.
We ran through the forest, guided only by John's instinct and sheer desperation. The whispers followed us, growing angrier. Branches seemed to reach out, clawing at our clothes and skin. At one point, I tripped and fell, and when I looked up, I saw the old woman again. This time, she wasn't alone. Figures stood behind her, my coworkers, their faces pale and lifeless, their eyes hollow.
Stay with us.
They whispered, in unison. John yanked me to my feet, and we sprinted until the fog began to thin and the first rays of dawn pierced through the trees. When we finally broke out of the forest, collapsing onto the dirt road where our truck was parked, the whispers stopped. We drove back to town in silence, too shaken to speak. When we finally told the locals what had happened, their faces darkened.
You shouldn't have camped there,
One of them said.
That land is cursed. Years ago, a construction crew disappeared in those woods. They say their spirits still wander, luring others to join them.
I didn't believe in curses before that night, but now every time I close my eyes, I see the old woman's lantern and hear my coworkers' whispers. I haven't been back to the forest since, and I never will. Thank you for watching until the end of the video. Please hit follow to support the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next video. See you soon, and goodbye.